Can an inflatable kayak be used on seawater and for coastal paddling? This question is asked now and as such, here's a useful example video from a trip with one of the most capable inflatable kayaks, the Itiwit X500 Strenfit from decathlon.
Dan-Erik, how are we feeling?
I think this is a really fun paddle. We're jumping around in the waves and have a great time.
I think so, yeah. It's a bit windy today. It's actually about 6 meters per second, going up towards 7, so we'll have some waves later on. But we're prepared for that, I think.
Yeah.
All right, let's avoid these rocks.
My name, the paddler behind the voice you'll hear in this video, is Patrik Vuorio. I run the Air on the Water YouTube channel, and over the past years I've been one of the most active Itiwit X500 kayakers out there, in addition to many other inflatable kayaks of different brands, and I've gone sea kayaking with them quite a bit.
Today I am in Stockholm, Vaxholm Sea, and I'm going to do a paddle with Patrik, Air on the Water, up to a fortress. I think this is going to be really fun.
So now we're heading out to seawater actually, and we're gonna see that fortress over here in Vaxholm. So we're gonna have a few days, and actually Dan-Erik has invited me to come paddling in where he lives. So that's gonna be awesome. A few days here of Itiwit X500 paddling fun.
A couple of days of fun.
Yeah, sounds great.
This was a memorable and really rewarding trip and worth showing in and of itself. And for my friend Dan-Erik, it was a bit special as it was his first trip going on seawater in the archipelago with some wind and chop with the Itiwit X500 kayak. It's always a useful test when you are out in new circumstances for the first time, and a good learning opportunity. I'll come back to this in a moment.
All right, welcome to Vaxholm.
Thank you.
How are you feeling in your X500?
Today I'm happy.
Sounds like a good thing to be. Let's go check out the fortress. All right, so here we have Dan-Erik visiting from Sandviken in Sweden and seeing the Vaxholm fortress in the Stockholm archipelago for the first time. This is actually my second time paddling here only, so it's nice to be back. And this is basically a historic location which was part of the fortifications in the Stockholm archipelago, and this was actually the defense of the entry point really to Stockholm. At this point it's a museum, and if you go here by bus or by ferry from Stockholm city, you can visit the fortress, and there are some great panoramic views from on top of there actually, so that's recommended.
Alright, so by now, as this is recorded, it's 1 year later. Dan-Erik has paddled countless times with his Itiwit X500 kayak, so he's seen a lot on the water. But as we headed out on seawater here, this was actually the first time that he had the opportunity to really try out this kind of chop on more open water. So that's always a useful experience, and I will be discussing the Itiwit X500 and its characteristics and paddling performance in this video, as it's simply a good example, a great day on the water. I'll be mixing footage from this trip with analysis both on the Itiwit X500 as a kayak, inflatable kayaking with its possibilities and limitations, coastal paddling and sea kayaking, and safety, both when out in these kinds of water and in cold water, and in much more advanced waters as well, because this is still the inner archipelago. It's relatively protected, it's windy but nothing crazy on this day, so this is what I would call reasonably normal paddling circumstances on a windy day with a bit of chop. And I think that's the kind of conditions that most paddlers will find themselves in. In fact, when you are using an inflatable kayak like the Itiwit X500, it's always good to be aware of your limits and what is reasonable to do, what is safe to do, and I'll continue the discussion in a moment.
Right, Dan-Erik, how are we feeling?
I think this is a really fun paddle. We're jumping around in the waves and have a great time.
I think so, yeah. It's a bit windy today. It's actually about 6 meters per second, going up towards 7, so we'll have some waves later on. But we're prepared for that, I think.
Yeah.
So before going into the specifics of the Itiwit X500 kayak, well, this entire video is a useful example if you're interested in the kayak, because you can actually see from different angles how the kayak behaves in reasonably mild chop, and later in the video, quite a bit of counterwind and side waves and chop. Nothing crazy, but still. So we'll need to talk about paddling safety. If you're an experienced kayaker, you probably know this very well, hopefully, and that is that you really need to know the circumstances that you're getting yourself into and make sure that they're appropriate for your kayak and your paddling ability, the abilities of your kayak, and that you have an appropriate risk level. So if you're newer to this, then there are some things that you really need to think about. Obviously, always wear a PFD, a personal flotation device. Stay reasonably close to land unless you're really sure of what you're doing, and be aware of factors like wind. On this day we had strong counterwind on the way back, and an inflatable kayak will typically be more vulnerable to wind than a hardshell kayak, and any kayak is vulnerable to the wind one way or another. So your kayak model should really define in which waters you go out. This kayak, the Itiwit X500, has the option of a spray skirt, and you have a closed deck, and it is, in its V2 or later versions, what I would consider quite stable if you're used to it. So this is a kayak that's capable for some chop and more serious waters, whereas many inflatable kayaks are quite vulnerable to the wind. And if it's an open inflatable kayak where you have waves splashing over you, etc., etc., many inflatable kayaks aren't suitable for going coastal paddling, at least not far from the coast. But it depends on your own ability and experience. And one important part of experience is being able to recognize the risks and making sure that you have an appropriate risk level. In this case, we're paddling in cold water. The seawater is already cold, as this is in October, and we are both in dry suits. It's under Dan-Erik's jacket. Mine can be seen in the video. So ending up in the water for a longer period of time or suffering from cold water shock could be really dangerous. So one of the things you need to be ready for, whether it's in the Itiwit X500 or with an inflatable kayak or any other kayak really, is to get back into your kayak. You need to have practiced that. You need to be sure that you are able to do it with the kayak that you're using by yourself or assisted by another paddler, in which case you both need to have practiced, preferably together. So if you aren't sure about that you can confidently get back into your kayak in the conditions that you're paddling in, then you would want to be close to land, and you would want to be obviously dressed for the water temperature, not just the air temperature, and you want to be sure that you don't have wind that is pushing you out from land in the wrong direction, where you might not be able to get back into land. And that's a typical issue in inflatable kayaking. Now, when it comes to the Itiwit X500, it is actually a really capable kayak. It's not quite as efficient as a good sea kayak would be, a hardshell sea kayak, But it's about as close as an inflatable kayak gets, and I'll be discussing that in a moment, because after the lunch break here, we will have the wind against us and a bit of chop, and then you really get to see the kayak being put more to the test, especially for Dan-Erik, as this was the first time that he really experienced this on seawater. So I'll get back to that in a moment. Of course, one advantage of an inflatable kayak oftentimes is that it's lightweight in many cases. The Itiwit X500 has 16 kilograms on it, so that makes for some nice portability.
Tjena. Hur är läget? Lunchdags?
Ja.
Yes.
If I were to summarize the X500's capability as a sea kayak, it is stable as a stable sea kayak would be, but it's not as stable as a pontoon-style inflatable kayak. We'll get back to the paddling performance a bit, as we'll see some waves in a moment.
Now I got new energy, been drinking water, having some sandwich. I've been concentrating on paddling in this wind, been really fun, and also all these ships. What a great trip, and we expand the trip, so instead of one fortress we now have seen 2 fortresses, and going to paddle back between 2 islands and see the first fortress from the back side. So awesome today.
Hello.
All right, so this is where we get back into the water after lunch, and as we head back westwards to where we started, but on the north side of Rindö Island, it is actually a reasonably good example for, I would say, paddling circumstances that most paddlers would go out in. It will be windy, we'll have the wind against us, a bit from the side with some waves and a bit of splash. Nothing crazy, but choppy enough. And as such, for most paddlers, this is probably about as much as they would go out in, or should go out in. Because if it is more choppy and really windy, you really need to make sure that you are capable of handling those kind of waves and that wind, and that you are able to get back into your kayak or back to land quickly if you were to fall into the water, and we always need to be prepared for that. So now we'll see the X500 in action, and it paddles similarly to a sea kayak in many ways, but with limitations. So it won't track quite as straight as a sea kayak with a skeg or a rudder. You will need to compensate a bit with paddling technique, such as edging or with your paddle strokes. And if the wind and waves are coming at you from the side or from behind you, you will need to compensate more than you would with a sea kayak typically, because this kayak, ultimately it is inflatable. It performs so much better than many other inflatable kayaks in terms of tracking and such, but it will still get pushed around a bit if you have side waves. And for me, it's never really been an issue. I have gotten used to that kind of compensation because I've gone out in so much chop, so many conditions. But if you're not paddling as much as I do or Dan-Erik does, then that might sometimes feel like you have to work a bit compared to a sea kayak, especially if you are an experienced sea kayaker. But at the end of the day, the advantage of an inflatable kayak like this is that it's portable. I mean, you can bring it in a backpack, you can store it with the space of a backpack, which is amazing. So of course that's the trade-off. Still, the X500 does track really nicely. Relevant to sea kayaking, it's even possible to go kayak camping, although it makes for some tricky packing. Oops, lost my cap there. It was a windy day after all. So yeah, the X500 does handle really nicely, but you should be prepared to compensate a bit. And if you're newer to kayaking, the balance won't be necessarily that easy at the beginning. You have to learn how to handle the kayak. You use your knees to brace, you use your paddle to regain balance in the water. But it is capable. The thing is, when you are paddling, you can keep straight unless the wind is crazy from the side. Then you might need to work a bit more, like I have to kind of counter the wind here. But since the X500 does not have a skeg, it will start turning the moment you stop paddling. So if you are paddling at some speed, you stop paddling, then the kayak will move with the wind and the waves, or just in the direction that you were paddling last. And some people find that a bit cumbersome. I have never really had an issue with it, but that's something that's good to know. Now, it does handle waves really nicely. It will bounce a bit in waves because of the way it's set up, and it's not as long as a sea kayak would be. Typically, this is just 3.8 meters. But for me, that's actually part of the fun, because as soon as it gets bouncy, as soon as you have some waves, you get to bounce around a bit. It's not as efficient as a longer sea kayak would be, but I would say it's often more fun in a way that would be the case in a sea kayak, because you get to bounce around a bit if you enjoy that. Now, it's also a matter of that you will need to work a bit harder than you would with a sea kayak. At the end of the day, this is a relatively wide kayak at 64 centimeters. It sits relatively high in the water, and it's not as sharply pointy, if you will, in the front of the kayak, so you will have more resistance from the water than you would in most hardshell kayaks. But, I mean, if you're willing to work a bit and just put in a little bit more paddle power than you might have to do with the sea kayak, it can still perform about as what a sea kayak would. And I've been out on 4-day paddling expeditions in the outer archipelago with full camping gear and everything loaded into the kayak together with sea kayaks. It is a capable kayak. So if you're interested in this kayak, there's a whole Itiwit X500 playlist on this channel. Check that out. And keep an eye on this channel for more Itiwit X500 videos as well.
But what a paddle. I'm very happy. Thanks to Patrik, who brought me to Stockholm again.
Well done out at sea.
Check out his channel, Air on the Water.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. It will help others find the channel, and you will be updated on new upcoming videos. Stay safe and happy paddles!